Welcome to the show. My guest tonight, Eliese Watson.
Hello.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to be here.
Can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Eliese. I own ABC Bees. We are a beekeeping education and training company. We do programming all over Canada, specializing in the skill of apiculture, keeping honeybees in your backyard, on your farm, self-sufficiency, prepping, doomsday, however you want it to roll.
When people ask you about what you do you lead with beekeeper or educator or something else? Usually
neither.
What is it then?
Well, typically when people ask me what I do for work, I just say I work in on my computer at home, and they're like, oh, because typically as soon as I say I'm a beekeeper, people don't tell me anything about themselves. They just drill me with beekeeping questions and interesting things, which is great. Except I end up kind of leaving like I was a monolith, just monologuing the entire social engagement. It gets really awkward.
I'm actually planning on doing that right now.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, this is the right environment. I mean, it's not really the best environment when you're trying to get to know your kid's best friend's parent.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said you're mostly on the computer. I want to know what a normal day for you looks like.
Well, I write a lot of beekeeping educational training. So most of the curriculum that we do is online learning. So if you're living rurally or in different locations throughout Canada, you can take a beekeeping course, whether it's beginners, advancing your skills in stock production, self-sufficiency, those sorts of models. I teach a post-secondary level too. And so I spent a lot of time building curriculum. We just finished a course for veterinary science, people with a DVM that are looking at including bees, insects, into their husbandry or care, vet, client, patient relationship stuff. So I spent a lot of time writing curriculum, programming, working with other beekeepers, other professionals to make sure that innovations in beekeeping and beekeeping knowledge and disease, that the content I create is accurate. And then this summer, I spend a lot of time outside, which is the best. Beekeeping, teaching, hands-on programming.
What does a typical day in the summer look like?
Oh, it's so good. It starts usually before the sun comes up because I try and get the beekeeping done before it gets too warm. And usually by 1 o'clock, it can be pretty hot out. And wearing a bee suit is a great way to get sweaty. So I usually get up early. I organize what equipment I need for the day, load trailer, load truck, and then go out into the apiary and start checking out my bees. And then throughout the summer, we have programming on weekends and evenings for people to get their fingers sticky, kind of learn skills of apiary management. And some people just want selfie stick moments where they're just, showing up at the Confluence or used to be the Fort Calgary here and just want to see what beekeeping would be like to kind of either check it off a bucket list or, potentially be looking at whether it's a side hustle or a hobby, all the way to people actually looking at potentially transitioning into apiculture as a career.
What is the main thing people get wrong about beekeeping before they even get to that point?
Oh, people who just are enthusiasts for beekeeping, or people who just assume?
Just a common misconception, not an enthusiast before they even get to be an enthusiast.
Oh, that wasps and bees are the same. So they think that
and I hate bees.
Yeah, that or because of Winnie the Pooh, they always show those honeycomb kind of structures hanging from trees that are yellow wasp nests. And so people will contact and be like, hey, I have honeybees. You want to come get them? And I've been doing this for 17 years now. I'm send me a photo. And for sure, it's this massive paper nest in their tree. And they're here's some honeybees. I'm that's a wasp nest. Call an exterminator. I'm not coming to take that down because they're very different.
So how did you get into this kind of work?
It's a really funny story, actually. I grew up in a small town here in Alberta, and there was this old man. He was probably 5'4" and a million years old. And he always had these matching suspenders that were quilt fabric that always matched this little beanie hat he made, a welder's cap. You would come in every Friday and buy either a Kit Kat or a Twix, stand there, talk to me, eat half of it, and then fold the other half up and put it in his pocket. And he was taking it home to give to his wife. And I was this is the cutest old man I've ever met in my entire life. And I finally asked him, like, are you still welding at this age? And he goes, why would you think I'm a welder? I'm like, well, you're wearing a little welder's cap. He goes, no, I'm a beekeeper. This is the hat I wear underneath my veil. I was like, oh, I've always wanted to keep bees. He goes, well, I'll give you some. And I was like, no, I'm leaving this one horse town. I'm going to university. I'm getting out of here. A year later, I go to my roommate in college's family farm, and this beekeeper shows up. And I was like, I've always wanted to beekeep. I've always wanted to beekeep. And so the family's like, okay, he'll take you out. And so I like put oven mitts on my hands, like put a hoodie up, like pull the strings as tight as possible. So it's a little circle because he didn't have an extra bee suit. And like full on snow pants on. I don't know. And like rubber boots. And I'm out there like standing there while he's beekeeping. And I'm telling this guy the story of this old man. And he goes, oh, Jim? I said, yeah. I'm like, that was his name. He goes, these are his bees. I buy bees off of him every year. And I was like, no way. And so my first experience was standing there dressed like that. And then the bees attacked the beekeeper. And I stood there and I didn't get a single sting. And I was like, maybe I'm special.
It's meant to be.
Meant to be. And so that was like my first experience beekeeping. And after that, I was like, I have a beekeeping mentor out of the US. His name's Kirk O'Bio. And he always says, bees are a gateway bug. And nice. I feel like, I was hooked after that.
So you knew right away you wanted it to be a career instead of a hobby?
No, I just knew that I was like obsessed. And I didn't even think about it as like a future because I was 20. I didn't have a future. I was living in the moment, baby.
You often talk about beekeeping as animal husbandry.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think because bees are insects, when we think of husbandry, we just think of it like cows, sheep, goats,
I was
pigs.
thinking of cows, yeah.
You know, and but honeybees are an agricultural animal required for pollination, for, you know, commodity production. I mean, Alberta is the 5th largest honey producing region in the world. Billions of dollars of commodity production depends on honeybee pollination. So it's a huge industry. And I feel like when we look at the misnomers of like beekeeping in the general public mind, especially in pop culture where saving the bee or having bees is like kind of this like garden aesthetic of like a Martha Stewart garden where you have an English flowers and then you have a beehive in the corner. I mean, you can buy a beehive from Williams and Sonoma and it's copper topped and all those sorts of things. I think it's a mistake when people forget that they are animals and, you know, its important part is to look at the husbandry and the care of the animal, to be stewards of it. You wouldn't get a dog just so you could put it in a purse. At least I hope you wouldn't.
Some people do. So like you said, it's kind of a trendy thing. What are the biggest risks when people get into beekeeping without proper education?
Well, it's interesting. I started beekeeping without any education. But I did find mentors. Like I went out and was like, hey, started with the oven mitts and then I, you know, had a bee suit and was holding a hive tool and a smoker and was like, okay, what next? And reading books and stuff. So I don't know that like formal education, I guess this goes against the fact that I am an educator. Not everyone requires formal education in order to be good at stuff, but I do feel like having at least a clear understanding of the bee biology and the welfare of requirements for survival, you know, like a heat lamp for a snake is required and, you know, saltwater fish can't go in freshwater. Those sorts of general knowledge of like honeybees use social or social behaviors of honeybees is not an intuitive knowledge-based thing because they're not the same as vertebrates or mammals and animals that we're typically accustomed to caring for.
How do you know when someone is ready to keep bees instead of just being excited about the idea?
Oh, that's a really good question. I refuse to take responsibility. So I trust that they're not going to, you know, be a dick. Yeah. Is the kind of where I'm at. And the interesting thing is I feel like I have that luxury because people who are interested in keeping bees in the first place usually are a little bit weird. Like one of the things that has made being a bee educator so exciting is the weirdos that come to my programming. They always have enormous numbers of other hobbies. They'll like have a podcast or they'll also make their own chainmail or have a long history of like breeding hairless cats or, you know, like they're people who are used to learning new things, trying new things, not being an expert, usually have diverse hobbies, maybe different career backgrounds, maybe different educational backgrounds. Like I have medical doctors and lawyers and accountants, as well as like hippies that have no set address who are passionate for protesting, deforestation activities. It's like a huge wide gamut, but they all have the same characteristic at the core of who they are, which is they are desperately interested in continuing their learning and growth as a person. And so when someone comes to me, they're like, I'm going to keep bees. I'm like, great. How can I help you? And they come to me and they have questions that immediately I'm like, great. They're going to do great, because you have to always be inquisitive with managing bees because it's farming and nothing is ever set in stone or is consistent. The weather changes. It could be climate events like smoke or rain, flood, drought. And then the bees themselves are totally distinctive colony to colony.
Wow. Should I keep bees? No, hold on. That's not even what I'm asking. You got me though. But what are the benefits? Why do people want to keep bees at home? What are the benefits?
Well, you asked if you should keep bees. Maybe you don't need to keep bees, but you should hang out with beekeepers.
Okay.
Because you'll end up learning a whole bunch of weird stuff
Can
about
I even
weird
keep
things.
bees? I have no flowers and I have 2 huskies.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, your huskies may hate it, but I think like just because huskies are famously persistent, and if they decide they have a palate for wanting to eat those spicy flying insects, you may have vet bills of swollen mouths. Some dogs don't learn, and huskies are, I think, under one of those breed collections that may just not.
Yeah, they might want to get in there.
Yeah.
A little bee hunt.
You can keep bees in Calgary. Most municipalities have bylaws that permit you to keep bees. A lot of them require prerequisite learning or proof of learning through any sort of program. You could take my programs. There's other organizations and clubs and online websites. I mean, mine courses are the best. And I say that not because I have an ego, but because I've been doing it the longest as far as training and education. And I have a standard of expectation that's a post-secondary accredited. But as far as like putting bees in your backyard and why you would do it, typically it's usually just a hobby. Someone wants to get out from their at-home office, from behind a computer. I once saw a guy who wrote the screenplay for V for Vendetta. I helped a beekeeper every winter in LA for many years. And we caught a swarm in the backyard of his place. And we came back and he decided he wanted to keep them. And so we opened up the hive and we were looking, and there was some babies emerging, and there was some eggs and some larvae and the queen. And while we were looking at it, he just started crying. And it was like a quiet, silent moment. Me, my mentor, him, just kind of like having this really lovely moment. And then he said after it passed and we finished closing the beehive and stuff, he was like really grateful to have the bees there. And he was just like, wow, I forgot that like there's a world out here that exists that I don't even know anything about. And I really needed that. And I just was like, beekeeping is such an interesting thing, is that you can think about it as like some sort of, stewardship of like saving the world, save the bees. But typically when you talk to people who are into beekeeping, it never comes down to that. It's some sort of emotional, mental connection of like self-expression and creativity, connection with nature and the environment, feeling like a fluid connection to the holistic nature of our environment. So bees will fly up to 5-kilometer radius of your house. You asked, I don't have flowers in my backyard. Doesn't matter. Your neighbor has like a plum tree or an apple tree or a pear tree, Saskatoons, raspberries. There's a lot of different diversity, especially here in Calgary. But I think the reason people keep keeping bees has a lot more to do with the emotional connection. The hum of bees is the same frequency as the hum of a meditating, like Buddhist temple, the Om sound. And so there is like
we were kind of talking about that earlier.
The vibrations.
A friend told me that beekeepers live longer because of that.
Because of the vibrations of the bees?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like that's not a quantitative assessment, but I can definitely say that like there is a historical reference of like pre-industrial populations do typically have the oldest living members of those populations are beekeepers. But I think it has a lot to do with like, A, not living in urban centers where disease spreads because you're a farmer. And B, you're eating honey, which is really healthy for you. And C, you're getting stung by bees a lot, which actually stimulates the autoimmune system to activate. So you have your lymphatic system really activated and moving throughout your body, which is really good for your well-being.
Wow, it's like farmer acupuncture.
Absolutely. I had an old man that I thought I murdered in the desert of Arizona when I went tracking wild bees by following them. And he came with me and I found a bee colony underneath the crux of a rock in February. And so he said, well, I need some bees to do for this conference. And I was like, okay. So I reached in, and as I reached in, another rock from the pile of rocks kind of fell onto the colony, and they were Africanized bees. And they came out of that tunnel like almost like a Looney Tunes skit. And they just attacked this old man. Like he was covered in bees. It was terrifying. We were like a mile away from civilization in the desert. And I even took off, like I had a swimsuit underneath, but I threw my shirt off. I threw like my bag at him. I was like covered up because I was getting stung, but I was not getting attacked. And he just curled up and like covered his head. It's okay. It's just free bees. And then we left, and turns out that's what he is he's apitherapist. He does apitherapy, which is the injection of bee venom into the body to fight disease. He's been doing it forever. So his immune system response to bee venom is non-existent. I was pulling stingers out of his ears at dinner that night, and he wasn't even swollen. I think it would have killed a regular person.
Yeah, I didn't know any of that.
No. So yeah, there is such a thing as acupuncture with bees, and it's called apitherapy.
Wow. Part of the ABC.
No, I don't do it. Apiaries and bees for communities.
Oh.
I used to do a bumblebee research project called the Bumblebee Rescue and Foster Parent Program. I did it for 5 years through the university because people would call me and they'd be like, I have bees. And I'd show up and it was a little bumblebee nest. And so we'd rescue it and take it back to the university, and they'd take some samples at the university of the honey and the wax and the couple of the individuals and test for Nosema bombus, which is a parasite, well, a gut pathogen. And then they would, we'd have foster parents. People would sign up and they'd be like, I want bees. And we'd have these little custom painted wooden boxes, and we'd put the nests in there. They come to the university and they would pick up their little shoebox of bees and take it to their backyard and let the bees finish their life cycle.
Are there some decisions that beekeepers have to make that people don't realize carry real consequences?
That's a really good question. It's hard to scale when we think of like the important decisions beekeepers have to make, because it feels kind of like the important decisions that farmers have to make in general about productivity, about yield, about health and wellness of the animal. So for instance, if there's a few diseases that if honeybees get them, specifically one is called American foul brood, and it's like a real messed up disease. Like it's a spore-forming bacteria. As soon as adult bee gets it, it can spread it to the larva through feeding it through trophallaxis. That's the sharing of food. Basically, it looks like the bees are kissing. It's the cutest. But the pathogen, the little tiny bacterium, goes into the larva gut and then starts reproducing, kills the larva, explodes, spreading millions and millions of spores all over the colony. And then the nurse bees, the little worker bees inside the colony, clean it up, inoculating themselves with this bacteria and then spreading it throughout the colony. So it spreads extremely aggressively. It smells like rotting gym equipment. And bees drifting and moving and robbing, you can spread it and it can be pathological in a region very rapidly. Within a single season, you can have not just your hives, but other colonies, other beekeepers in the area. So the standard of practice is actually euthanasia, is you would kill the bees, the colony, and then you would burn or bury the equipment. So it's kind of the equivalent of like what a farmer would be experiencing with, bird flu or, mad cow disease, where you actually end up having a pretty concerning intervention that could completely decimate your outfit. And we're really lucky. We have a provincial apicultural department. Testing and inspecting for those diseases is free, and they'll send out an inspector to check. It's a small community of beekeepers here in Alberta and in Canada in general. So there's so much support and nurturing for people who are struggling or going through issues like that and how to manage it long term. But that is like, euthanizing your animals is always really hard, especially if it's your livelihood. But it's definitely difficult if your animal is like, your queen's name is Boadicea and your colony was painted by your kids and you're excited to have honeybees in your backyard. And then next thing you know, you have a disease and you're having to deal with a response that's expecting you to have a commercial agricultural reaction of destruction and euthanasia. That as a non-farmer bee enthusiast who's passionate about bees can be completely devastating and make you feel like a failure as a person. And so I do a lot of emotional coaching for beekeepers, both small and large outfits, where I'm like, you're going to get through this.
Have you had to deal with that much? And has it changed how you handle it now?
I've never had, knock on wood, American foulbrood, thank you, in my apiary. But I have had people contact me like, I got something weird going on. Can you come look? And then I've been like, we're going to load this stuff up right now. We're killing the bees. I've got a location. We're going to burn it tonight. We have to go get a fire permit. And that sucks. Something I have seen a lot of is a new disease that it's not new, it's an old disease, but it is a disease that is showing a lot of change. It's called European foulbrood. So it is also a spore-forming bacteria. It's a very different in its expression, and we're learning more and more about it. It's atypical versions, and we're finding now that if you have it expressed, like you're seeing your bees are sick from it, all of your bees and equipment have it. Just because you're not seeing it expressed doesn't mean you don't have an infection. It's kind of like typhoid Mary, where like she's a carrier spreading it, but not knowingly or eventually knowingly. But I think that's kind of an issue that we're going to be seeing more and more is people noticing that they have a pathogen issue, but being really insecure about how to tackle it. That's where beekeeping education is super important.
Going back to decisions that beekeepers make, is there any that you have to make early on that decide whether a hive succeeds or struggles?
Absolutely. I think the hardest time for a colony is typically coming out of winter, is the springtime. And so spring management in beehives is actually really tricky. I've pulled sleds out through fields. I've had to use my ice axe and like shovels to dig out colonies out in the field because you can't access it because we get a big March snowfall, snowdrift, and then a lot of heat. So the top of the snow covering the beehives is heavy. Underneath the snow is light. You can get collapsing of snow on colonies, causing colonies to suffocate, just like an avalanche being buried. And then you get out there and you need to supplement feeding them, because sometimes we don't have dandelions or willow or tree flowers available until, early May, because we have a really weird rainy or poor weather or cold spring. And so you have to get involved and supplement in order to make sure that there isn't a starvation issue. And, I think that's where the management comes in of like making a decision, like, is it too early to get in? Like, am I looking at nighttime temperatures that are going to be so cold that if I open the hive and release the heat and moisture from the colony that they've been maintaining as a homeostasis in order to supplement and feed them, am I now kind of subjugating them to an environment that is now too cold inside the colony? Do they have enough time to raise that temperature and survive the next 5 days or next couple of weeks? And so you have to be really close at the weather before you decide to make management decisions in the spring. And living in Alberta, just because it says it's going to be a high of 10 on Tuesday doesn't mean it's a high of 10. It could be a high of 20 or it could be minus 10. And so you have to be available and ready to go.
How did we end up being a top 5 spot for beekeeping then if the environment is so challenging?
Well, we could do a little like beekeeping 101.
Yes.
So a couple of things. A, we have loads of daylight here in Alberta, especially in northern Alberta. Like the sun doesn't really fully set up in Grand Prairie. And that's where the big outfits and big production and big honey yields come from, is up in northern Alberta. And the other reason is we're temperate. So that means like in July, we're going to have hundreds of hours of daylight hours. But also in July, we're maxing out at 30 degrees Celsius, typically for only like 7 days, maybe 10. And so because of that, the type of flowers that are endemic or even that we cultivate for food production in Alberta tend to thrive in areas where there isn't a huge amount of heat. We aren't a desert. And so because of that, the plant's strategy to attract pollination is nectar. So instead of just being pollen like a really dry climate would be, or if you were going to look at somewhere else, it'd be like, maybe if you think of Hawaii, there's these large, showy tropical flowers, like orchids even, that will flower for like 2 months, waiting for a specialist pollinator to provide for them. And they climb, or they're really tall because they're competing against like a entire environment covered in green. Here in Alberta, we have a short season, but we have a temperate summer season. And so the plants are short, not super tall. I mean, they rarely exceed over hip height, unless you got like sunflowers or things like that. And then the other thing that they have is they have multiple flowers per plant. So if you look around at any sort of native or non-native plant, things that are growing really freely in ditches, maybe even cultivars in your backyard, perennials specifically, if you look, there'll be like 4 or 5 or 6 flowers on a single stem. And that's really great because it means a bee can get like more caloric intake of nectar by flying less. So they're spending less energy to get it. And then we have huge monofloral plant cultivars like canola that are super productive in nectar, have a lot of flowers per plant, and produce quite a high quality and demandable yield for the exportable market. So we have all those things. Long daylight hours means if a bee can fly for, 16 hours a day, they will.
The perfect storm.
Perfect summer day.
How does the responsibility change between keeping bees in the city and a rural environment?
Both require you provide water to your bees, but I think in the city, it's hard to keep track of where your bees are getting water from. And so it's really important that you're making sure they're getting water from your own yard and not from a neighbor's kiddie pool or hot tub or leaky faucet or dog water. The big thing is being a good neighbor in the city. A big mistake people have is that they think that it's, their backyard, they can do whatever they want with it. And in my opinion, I'm like, man, summer is way too short for you to make anyone feel like they can't enjoy their backyard in the city. And so I think it's, you can get a permit to keep bees in your own backyard. Yeah, there's bylaws. But I do feel very strongly that to be a good beekeeper is to be a good neighbor. And so you should be talking to your neighbors, letting them know that you have bees, making sure they feel secure with it. Because they don't have to have an allergy for them to be like, I'm actually terrified. Especially if your neighbors are newcomers or come from Southeast Asia, Africa. Bees that are native to those locations are a different species and they're aggressive. They're terrifying. So if you found out that your neighbor was keeping, hornets, you'd be like, you're insane. Please don't. Right? Like, I don't want to be in my backyard having a barbecue and out of the blue, there's like 10,000 hornets in my backyard. And I'm now looking at my backyard from my window instead. Honeybees are not neighborly. Like, they will forage for nectar. They're not going to bug a neighbor's barbecue, but you never should have someone feeling unsafe because of your actions in your neighborhood. That's being a crappy person.
If many people are keeping bees in the same area, how does that affect all of the hives?
Oh, so this is actually really interesting research that's happening all over the world. Is this competition between honeybees, which are non-native species to North America, and native bees, which are solitary bees, bumblebees. You'll see like little leafcutter bees, little fairy bees. There's so many different species. And so now we're starting to question do honeybees have a competitive advantage against native bees? Because honeybees are eusocial. So they live in these large colonies year round. Their populations, exceed 25,000, so upwards to 100,000 individuals per colony. Their ability to maximize and take advantage of floral resources in the area is very, very strong because they're foraging for pollen and nectar to provide food stores for the entire winter season. Thermoregulate the hive, to feed the progeny, to feed themselves. So a winter colony has to have about 100 pounds of honey in it going into winter here in Alberta. Versus solitary bees, they typically just forage for nectar and pollen for their own consumption and for a small amount of stores for them to feed their progeny, which will either hatch out this year. Usually, depending on the species, bumblebees will have like 50 individuals. Solitary bees, solitary by nature, they don't live in social structures that are colonial. So in large populations, they'll only be producing, maybe a dozen progeny. And a lot of times they don't even hatch out that same season. They'll just like stay within their larval or pupal state within the cell and then emerge in the spring. And so when they have less numbers, and less progeny, it takes more time for those populations to recover from environmental stresses, whether it's environmental degradation and development, habitat loss, or pesticide, herbicide use and poisonings. And then the other question is there competition between honeybees and native bees? So there's been a lot of really interesting research, all starting out in the UK, where there was like, public research, school-age kids, where they're counting bees and looking at the competition, counting plants, to now actual really good studies being done, especially here at the University of Calgary. And so what we are finding is that there is a potential for competition, and that there is a finite amount of resources available to all pollinating invertebrates, and then trying to find out what that collection of competition is taking place on, what specific plants for generalists and what specific plants for specialists. A lot of solitary bees are specialists, which means they only will pollinate or get nectar or pollen from a handful of different flowers. And usually that has to do with the flower structure, shape is specialized to their body shape and access. And so when we look at specialists, a lot of times those are the ones that end up having the most amount of pressure. Because if a generalist, a bee that has maybe a long tongue like a bumblebee or a short tongue like a honeybee, that they're able to then just like go into that ecosystem or that environment, take nectar from whatever plants that are in the area and then leave, which really decreases the amount of resources available for those specialists, which can lead to decreased productivity in a reproductive sense for next generational progeny, or end up having there be potential stress on the adult and then have them not be reproductive at all. So it's interesting. I think there's a lot more research that is being done at present and more publications to come out. But I do feel a strong hesitancy towards supporting all people having bees. And I do think that the densification of honeybees in an urban setting should be monitored. And a lot of the bylaws that we put in, especially when I was consulting with the city of Edmonton on their municipal bylaw change from illegal to legal and keeping bees there, the initial pilot did track through zip code or postal code who had bees and what. And you could look at a map and see if your postal code started with these three, number digits, then you could identify like, oh, there's 6 beekeepers in that postal code. Well, that's only a 2-block radius area. Maybe you shouldn't keep bees. Maybe you should just knock on some doors, walk on some alleys and make a friend and keep bees with someone else. Because I think having beehives in every single backyard is unnecessary. And it goes against my idea of that like hive mentality that we can build through a communal culture of society, that the benefits we have through living in an urban environment. I like the idea of urban farming. I like the idea of community gardens because I like the idea of people sharing space, sharing knowledge, and sharing enthusiasm. And so, yeah, I think go back to your question about the competition of resources and too many beehives, that is a real concern. And especially in places like Hong Kong, and I've been beekeeping in New York City, there's very limited food resources for honeybees, let alone the native bees and the nesting site competition. There's already so much pressure on these very special, unique species that exist here before, colonization brought honeybees over. I think it would be really detrimental to ignore that for our own personal pleasure. It would kind of go against my values, which is not getting what you want, but being responsible for what you have.
Is there anything that's harder to teach at scale compared to when you have a more personalized approach with someone?
I think the hardest thing to teach at scale is the realism of the labor and the discomfort of the labor. I've consistently, and I have friends that work for a company called Alveole, and they do beekeeping all over the country and all over the world and do rooftop beekeeping for corporations, is like people, especially young people, are like, man, I'm going to save the world. I'm going to save the bees. I'm going to be a beekeeper. And I'm like, great. How good are you at loading and unloading boxes from a trailer and using ratchet straps? Because that's going to be like 50% of your labor. And then like the other part is like a single box. Like if you look at a tower of beehives in the fall, you'll see like they'll look like these like little monoliths in the field, and they're broken up into sections of separate boxes stacked. A single one of those boxes full of honey is a 110-pound deadlift. And a lot of the time it's over shoulder height. So you're not squat lifting. You're actually lifting how, your health and safety advisor says not to lift on a regular basis. And having to lift something that heavy over your shoulders and the box is narrower than your hips. It sucks. It sucks so bad. And for some reason, the hives are designed that the handles are like rock climbing pinch. So you have to like pinch your fingers underneath and then lift with a beveled in edge into the like 3/4 inch plywood. It doesn't make any sense. And so like I come from like a family of Indigenous background. I was like built for punching cows and birthing babies in a field. So for me to like lift these boxes and toss them around, it's kind of like I was built for it. If you have hip problems, if you have lower back problems, beekeeping will destroy you. And so when people are like, I really like beekeeping. I have 1 hive in my backyard. I think I want to keep 10. I'm like, great. How are your health benefits at your regular job to cover your physio? You know, like, and I think that's something that can be really tricky if you're not coming from a farming background. It's how really labor intensive the work is.
I'm going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about bees.
Okay.
But actually, before we go on break, I want to say that I secretly watch bee videos all the time.
Yeah. Do you watch the Texas bee lady who catches the bees without a veil on?
No.
Oh, okay. Texas bee girl.
Okay.
She's like made...
Shout out Texas Bee Girl.
Texas Bee Girl. She's like, and then Hillary Kearney, my friend, Girl Next Door Honey, they've made beekeeping voyeurism extremely popular due to their ability to comfortably and calmly communicate bee knowledge to people while simultaneously doing something that looks insane. And I can say Texas Bee Girl is doing something insane because there are Africanized bee strains in Texas, and she's doing it without a veil and cutting them out of like walls of houses.
I see, those videos where they look through the walls with like, I don't know, not X-ray, heat signatures.
Yeah. Mm.
And then they find the queen, clip it, and
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing that, and especially in the southern U.S. in California, like my buddy Kirk, he would catch about 250 swarms in 365 days.
Wow.
And so the amount of bees that are endemic and flying and swarming and moving into urban dwellings and, you know, boots of Volkswagens and upside down bins on rooftops, it's like crazy. There's bees everywhere. And so the amount of cutouts and removals people do is insane. And so I'm glad that they're able to share what they're doing online and maybe get some sort of income from it because it's not a profitable venture.
We're taking a break.
Okay.
We'll be back. Hey, everyone. If you're new to the show, please subscribe on YouTube. Lots of listeners on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio. Keep subscribing there. Share it with someone. If you think it's a cool concept, share it with your friends. We want to keep it going. So, thanks so much. Stay tuned for more Deets. And we're back. Okay, you've said you're always learning.
Yeah.
What are some lessons that bees have forced you to learn the hard way?
Oh man, patience. I am like a famously impatient person. I'm the type of person who you want around if there's like a burning building and like a cat on the 3rd floor. Cause I would just like run into the fire without even thinking of my own safety and like grab that kitty and then like leap out onto a stack of mattresses on the ground. Like that's my personality. And like that is not how you manage a tiny population of eusocial insects that communicate through vibration and pheromone. Like bringing, a hammer to a delicate community is like a great way for you to get chased into the trees for no fault but your own. And so the other thing is like scale of time is the idea of like understanding the rhythms and the systems of the season is like what I'm anticipating in April is different than what I'm anticipating in July is different than what I'm anticipating in August. And those sorts of skills took me a lot longer than I think a regular person would learn simply because of my stubbornness and impatience. So I think, when it comes to lessons being learned from beekeeping, it's really kind of jumping into the slipstream of the rhythms of the seasons and the slipstream of the rhythm of a colony, because they do have a annular cycle. And it is like a bell curve, just like daylight hours are a bell curve. We're increasing daylight hours right now. Colonies are increasing population size right now, even in the winter underneath the snow. And then in the fall, daylight hours shrink. Beehive colonies and brood production, brood as babies, decreases with daylight hours. They work synchronistically with the environment. They evolved with that environment. And so that's the biggest lesson I've learned is just like, there's a phase, there's a season, there's a rhythm. And then like those things have completely transpired into how I'm allocating my time, my relationships with myself and with others. And it's been super healing of like, it's winter, man. Sleep in, you know?
Is there anything that continues to surprise you about it, even though you've been doing it for so long?
Oh yeah, man. I see weird stuff all the time. So when
what?
Well, like when I first started beekeeping, I remember I opened a colony up in the spring and I looked and I could see the queen was there. And then I could see that she was laying multiple eggs in a cell. I was like, that's weird. I didn't know what that was. So I took photos and I sent it to my mentor. I texted it to him. His name's Bill. Bill calls me and goes, that's weird. I said, yeah, what's going on? And he's like, I don't know. And I immediately was like, wait, what? What do you mean you don't know? Like, you're the expert. He's like, bees are weird. And I was just like, wait, that's does not compute. That's not accurate. That's not okay. There needs to be an answer. And so he asked me like a whole bunch of questions. And he was like, oh, you don't have enough bees coming out of winter. That colony is too small. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you need about 2 pounds of bees. So think like a volleyball cluster, like a tight-knit pile of bees would be a volleyball. You just don't have enough bees. There's not enough bees to forage, to regulate temperature, to tend babies. So queen wants to lay eggs, but she can't lay 1,000 eggs, 2,000 eggs a day because there's not enough bees to tend them. So she's laying a lot of eggs, but she's just kind of cycling in the same area over and over again, hoping that there'll be enough bees to take care of the babies and reproduce. And I was like, oh, now I see that. And I'm like, obviously that's what I see. But I'm constantly I've seen colonies with 2 queens laying side by side on the same comb. They're not combative. I was like, that's crazy. That never happens. And every beekeeper I've ever spoken to, they're like, oh, I see that. Happens all the time.
Does that make it 2 colonies?
No. It's usually a mother and a daughter. So maybe the mother's like, they're like, we want you to lay 2,000 eggs a day. And she's laying 16. So they're like, you know what? We'll raise a new queen. And then we'll have like a really, a non-January 6th, like transition of power where it's like, okay, you're going to retire. And then we'll have, the daughter come up and she'll, supersede and take over in a healthy transition of power. And it happens more often than you think. And then honestly, I one of the things I enjoy the most is like meeting beekeepers who've been doing it for a long time because they always have the right way of doing it. And usually I've never done it that way. I'm like, really? You do that? And they're like, oh yeah, it's the best way. And I'm like, you're wrong. And then I go in my hives and I'm like, maybe I'll try that. And I'm like, yeah, that's different. It does work. It shouldn't in my brain, but it does. And I think like that's the cool thing is I can keep bees according to a textbook that's from like 1820 and it works.
How do you decide whether to step in or let the hive sort things out on its own?
That takes experience. You just have to when I first started, I was working with a beekeeper in Colorado and he just pulled the lid off and he was like, oh, this colony's queenless. And I was like, he hadn't even like looked at a bee yet. I was like, how the hell? Now I do the same thing. I can hear it. I can actually hear the hum of the frequency of the bees is different. I can see the movement on the frame is different. Before I even pull anything out, I can look at the foraging behavior and the bees flying around the colony. It's different. It's subtle. And so just like anything, like there's subtlety and nuance to a skill. And, like that whole idea of like 50,000 hours, I think is like for mastery. I think that's another like skill or lesson that I've really been embracing is like the idea of expertise really comes into like taking time to nurture a craft. And I feel like people now more than ever are really valuing that as individuals, not necessarily in a career landscape, but more of like, it feels really good to notice nuance, to notice subtlety, to feel acclimatized to a skill set or an interest. And it could be the Roman Empire, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be a functional state of society. It could just be a personal attainment of like being really good at cross stitch. And so I feel like, being an artisan or an expert, those things take a lot of time and a lot of noticing and a lot of presence. And so yeah, to know when to intervene into a colony or not, I mean, you can have a checklist. There are checklists that I provide and other people have there are things that you should know about that rhythm of a system of beekeeping that are pretty consistent across the species for maintaining. Whether you're here or in, Oklahoma, it doesn't matter. There's like a really good annular cycle of bee behavior that you should be anticipating certain behaviors expressed. And if you're not, there's a timeline specifically here as a 4-season climate that if you don't intervene, the winter will kill them or they'll fail to succeed, that you don't necessarily have in a climate that has consistent foraging availability and plant resources like a tropical area throughout the year. So there are windows of time where if you don't intervene, the colony will fail.
Are there particular situations that feel the most demanding as a beekeeper to you?
Oh man, harvesting honey. If you were to ask me like, what is your least favorite thing? I would say honey. And it's such the opposite. Like I have so many friends, like, shout out to my friends, the honey merchants, Kate and Will, the royal family of the honey merchants. They sell honey. They're at every farmer's market you can find really here in Calgary. You'll see them. They produce beautiful honey. They love honey. They love hustling it. They love selling it. They love sharing the bee news. They love extracting it. They like everything about it. I have always been a child that hated being sticky. I chose a career where when I'm beekeeping and I'm sweating, my elbow joints and my knee joints and like where my belly folds, sticky. I am creeped out by my own body and have probably 2 showers a day sometimes in the summer, consistently. When I harvest honey this year, record honey year, I produced over 120 pounds per colony. It was the worst. I hated every second of it. The honey house, I keep it at about 38 degrees Celsius in there, sealed from the outside world so wasps don't get in. The honey is hot. The extractor is hot. The uncapping knife slices through the wax, so it's hot. It sucks. Each box, 110-pound deadlift. I lift each box off the hive onto a pallet, from the pallet into the truck or trailer, into the truck or trailer, into the garage, into the warming closet, in the warming closet, out of the warming closet. Lift the box to uncap the frame, put it in the extractor. I'm lifting a single box 1,000 pounds because 10 times. I hate it.
How do you stay attentive instead of going on autopilot when you have tasks like that you don't love as much?
Oh, I listened to your podcast.
Yes.
Well, I think, yeah, totally. No, I think like you have to get on autopilot because this is like, you're not dealing with live bees at the time. You have like your own systems of cleanliness, hygiene, bottling, systems of like extraction, filtration, sanitizing. Like there's this whole rhythm and system you have to create. And the first few years you're figuring out what that system looks like because at least for me, I disentangle it every year and then reestablish it each fall. Like I don't have it in working order all year round. I only need it for 1 month of the year. And then I put everything away and labeled boxes and make sure everything's where it belongs so I can pull it out a year later and set the whole system up again. And so honestly, like the first few years of creating the systems, that's tricky, making sure you have a system that works. But I've been like 17 years, man. Now I'm just like, ugh. Like my husband, even yesterday, he was doing some financial planning for the year. And he goes, I can tell when you're really having fun with beekeeping. And he laughs. I said, why? He goes, our electricity bill in September was insane. And I was like, what was it? He goes, it was 3.5 times our average monthly cost. Because I have a heater on. I have the extractor running. I have all these things plugged in. Like I have a separate breaker system in the garage.
Wow.
So like, yeah. And so, yeah, I listen to so many podcasts while I'm like sweating. And honestly, I do consume a fair amount of wine.
Nice. I hear people working with other animals and they say certain things come home with them. Does that happen with a beehive? Like, do you take anything home after working with the bees mentally at the end of the day?
Oh, like that. I was thinking of my friend Savannah. She's a vet. And yeah, honestly, she has like, I think 4 dogs.
Oh, taking them home.
Yeah, literally taking them home.
Yeah.
Like one of them has like a wheelchair. Like, for me, the problem of that I had to learn is being self-employed and having a home office is like this weird thing where like I would stop work in order to flip the laundry or sweep the floors or like clean the kitchen in order to like disentangle myself from the stress of work. And then I would like go back to work. And the next thing I know, like all I'd been doing all day was like talking to myself alone in the office or like cleaning the house, so that when I would go get groceries, I would like the teller would be like, how's your day going? And then by the time I'm finished my monologue, I'd be like walking out to the car with my groceries, totally devastated by like unloading weirdly personal information on like a 17-year-old kid who's just like absolutely doesn't care. I'm like, wow, that's the first human being I've spoken to in 12 hours. That poor human. I think we all experienced that during COVID. But I definitely I feel like that's kind of like the baggage I have at home is like when my family gets home, they are usually exhausted from like school from the day or like my husband from work. And they're just like looking to wind down. And I'm just like, hey, who wants to leave the house and go do something fun? And they're like, we just want to like watch TV or like draw or like do nothing. And I'm like, I need to get out of this house. And so I think like that's more of like the thing, bringing things home. As far as the beekeeping, no, like I'm actually less stressed after beekeeping in the field for a day. It's like my meditation. My husband used to tease me if I was really in a bad mood. He would like cattily be like, you haven't been beekeeping this week, have you? And I'd be like, well, it's been raining.
Let's say someone is not ready to keep bees, but they're interested. What are some ways they can engage or support that?
Absolutely. Honestly, there's so many cool organizations in Calgary now. Shout out to the Calgary Horticultural Society. Shout out to the Native Bee Society here in Calgary. It's called the Alberta Native Bee Council. There's some really cool projects going on at the U of C for insect surveys. So I know that you can go on to, I'll share the link and you can put it in the show notes.
I'll link it.
Yeah, of like opportunities for you to join walks where you are shown by a biologist or an entomologist how to catch insects. And then you walk around with these nets and you kind of like swing them around flowers. You catch them, they put them in little kind of containers. And then the entomologist or the biologist will show you how to identify the plant that you found them on, identify the species or even like the genus of the type of insect you captured. And then they keep those insect and animal surveys as a part of, civil-based research projects. We have that happening in Calgary all the time. It's the iNaturalist app. So you can look it up, Calgary, look Calgary bees, you'll see stuff. And then there's also like really great native ALCLA. They sell native plants. You could totally transition from getting your annuals or perennials from Home Depot to getting your annuals and perennials from producers here in Alberta. We have the CD Saturday that always comes up here in Calgary, which is a great place. There's seed exchanges, plant exchanges. We have a huge horticultural and native bee and native landscape conservation projects happening in Calgary. It's a hugely abundant community. So if you're interested in bees, but you're not sure you actually want to be responsible for husbanding a colony and production and extraction and maintaining livestock in the city, you don't have to. The biggest risk for all insects and vertebrates here in the world is habitat loss. So if you can like put out a flower box that has open face flowers that aren't complex, so don't think peony, think daisy. That alone will provide food resources for your butterflies and bees that are in your area, which can make that solitary bee that may have only laid 2 eggs this year, may lay 6, right? And that slow development can increase diversity and populations of much needed support for native bees. And then also native perennials, you can go on vacation this summer and have a water restriction and those plants will live. You're not going to get that with your non-native perennials or annuals that you're putting in the ground. And in the future of Calgary, from what I've been reading in the news, it might be good to plant plants that may not require watering in the future.
Okay, I'm on it.
Yeah.
I'll do it. And everyone do it.
Yeah, it's cheaper.
Let's say then someone is ready. What's the first step? Where do you get involved? How do they get involved with you?
Oh, well, you just go to abcbees.ca and take it from there. I have a huge YouTube channel. I think I have like 85 how-to videos in the field, professionally shot. Nerd City from like, I have courses, mini course, like a beekeeping basics course that'll go toward your municipal application too for beekeeping. Everything from like, what equipment do you need? Where do you get bees? Where do you put bees in your yard? What are optimal conditions for a colony? What does spring look like? What does summer look like? What does fall look like? How do I harvest honey? How do I prepare them from winter? What diseases exist? Like the beekeeping basics course goes through all of that. And then if you really want to nerd out, it's the level 1 beekeeping certificate. You can take it at post-secondary institution. You can take it on my platform. You can take it in person. I offer that course a few times a year in person. And that allows you to actually create a seasonal work plan that you could scale up into a commercial outfit, or at least feel like you have a week-by-week basis management plan. And then everything in between. Join your local beekeeping club. They're all over the place. Meetup groups. You're able to like come to field days. You could join me at the Confluence or Heritage Park this year. I run field days there in the evenings, date nights. You can come, throw on a bee suit, identify a queen, eat some fresh honey out of a colony, kind of get your fingers sticky. But yeah, all that's on abcbees.ca.
I love it. I hope people love this.
You know, if they don't,
what do you hope people get out of this? Just this episode?
Well, just how cool and interesting this city is. I think like that's one of the things I appreciate about this podcast, but also that I appreciate in general about Calgary is how diverse the interests and the communities are that live here. Like we live in this weird microcosm where everyone kind of knows each other, but there's a couple, like almost 2 million people that live in this city. And yet you can walk down a street and run into an old friend. Like that's not a typical big city vibe. That's usually not an opportunity you have. So Calgary is such an interesting place in that sense. And then because of that fact that we have 2 million people roundabouts living in the city, there's so much cool stuff going on all the time. And so many people with weird interests and hobbies and side hustles and, you know, D&D crews and like that I just really feel excited that we have the opportunity to like really shine in the city because people are so supportive here. So even if you're not into bees, knowing that there are beekeepers in your neighborhood, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. I hope also if anyone thinks they have a weird thing, that they reach out and we do this with their hobby or business.
Yeah.
I love it.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
That's all I have. And you have a heart out. So
I do.
Let's wait. These Japanese hornets, is that what they're called? Are they a big problem for us?
Yeah, they're Asian hornets. They originally were, they're all over, you know, East Asia, like China, Japan. They're coming over. They are here. They do ground nest too, which is a problem. A friend of mine, beekeeping in Nanaimo, found a woman called because she literally saw a Japanese hornet or an Asian hornet like eating her pumpkin a couple years ago. She took a photo of it and then she was a cool lady. She got a jar and caught it, which it's, you know, the length of my pinky. If you see it, you'd be like, what in God's name is that? They managed to use it to track it, found the nest, dug it out, and they burned it. They are incredibly aggressive and they're all over Europe now. They've migrated in with container ships and stuff. A single hornet, maybe 3, can take out a full colony of like 50,000 honeybees.
Wow. You know what? I probably have 90 more questions I'd want to ask you.
Yeah.
If you ever want to come back, you can.
Great. Maybe we could just have like a chat where we talk about weird and unusual events in a beekeeper's life.
I'm in.
I've got lots of strange stories.
Okay, we'll do that. We're going to do a part 2 then. Let's commit to it now.
Okay. Part 2. And then if people watching this or listening to this are like, don't do it, put it in the comments below.
Any comment is a good comment. So
exactly.
Do that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.